In 1980, it took 9 years to save for a house down payment. Today, it takes 36. But that's not even Gen Z's biggest financial challenge. There's student loans, there is education loans, college debts, skyrocketing rent, and the wages are stagnant. In fact, just yesterday, I learned about a distant relative of mine who has very recently moved to Chennai to pursue his career in animation design. And he's not making enough to cover his rent. He has to rely on his family to support him with that. And he's not alone. Gen Z is the most educated generation in history. So, why are they also the most financially screwed? That's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. Hello, everybody. My name is Lakshan. I'm your host for this episode.
And I'm Goldie, and this is episode 22 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast.
To understand this question further, we'll be breaking this episode down into three segments. The first one being the economic landscape for Gen Z currently, which is what's making life so expensive for them. The second one is what are the financial habits and decision making, which is how they spend, save, and invest money. And the third one is what is the future of Gen Z finance? Where are they heading and what needs to change? By the end of this episode, you learn just how much they need our support. Just like we need your support to grow this podcast. And you can do that by subscribing to this podcast and leaving a like if you are watching us on YouTube, and leaving us a 5-star review, and following us on Spotify or any other audio platform that you're listening to us from. With that, let's get on to the first segment of this episode, which is the current economic landscape for Gen Z. So, first things first, why does it feel so hard for Gen Z to get ahead financially? Now, globally, there's inflation and job market instability, which have created this perfect storm. According to Deloitte's 2024 survey on Gen Z and millennials, there's a statement which says that over half of Gen Z are living paycheck to paycheck. In countries like US and UK, the student loans are insane. We hear about it all the time. The housing costs are through the roof, and the wages are just not keeping up. But in India, it's slightly different because education is comparatively more affordable, but the unemployment rate for the youth is extremely high, along with rising living costs and increasing reliance on gig work to make financial stability, which feels like a distant dream right now. In fact, the situation, I've been hearing about this from a couple of friends of mine, that in the more um, aspirational side of Bangalore, the rent rental prices are going so high that people are just saying, you know what, screw this. I don't want to be staying in this side of the city. Let me just stay in the cheaper side of the city. Because of which, all of these properties are starting to lower their rent. That's how bad it's gotten for a lot of these people. And then there's, of course, the gig work in itself, which is a double edged sword. On one hand, it gives flexibility. On the other, there is no job benefits, the income is unstable, and there is no long term security whatsoever. Now, Goldie, you're someone who is very, very well traveled and exposed to various cultures. What are some things that you are noticing?
Well, from the offset, I want to call them the generation that are hustling away their way into managing money like never before. And why do I say this? I think what we have to observe from the get-go is that they have been exposed to debt very early in their life, in the sense of educational debt, which was never a scenario back in the 2000s or previous to that. I can only talk for my own previous educational experience because I have been born and raised in a country, but then I received my education in an entirely different country. So what I saw back then was this transition of fees and payment that my parents had to, endure for me, put me through what we call university, boarding school. However, ironically, back then, depending on where you lived and how you chose to go to university, you had something called European Union grants, which entitled you to almost a cost free education up to finishing university. And I was lucky enough to avail of this opportunity. Yet, the minute that my brother, for instance, entered to do his master's, and he's a millennial, so there was just a very short gap between us, there was a cost that came with it, where his degree that he spent for his master's was from the pocket of what was being spent by my parents. And consequently, what we've noticed is over the years, the world has seen this increase in education debt. So I would again speak for Europe. I can speak for the US. I think they are the most in debt community of students across the world. Unlike India, where maybe education is cheaper, but then in contrast, what I noticed, backed up by your statement, is if the population is a high one, which is the case for China and Southeast Asia, the opportunities for jobs are highly more competitive. So what have we seen in the flip side, which is again a phenomenon that took place maybe 2010 onwards? A lot of Indian students have come to Europe to get their masters. And these are affordable families who can, support the costs of the international fee system, which is quite high. Yet, unfortunately, those same students who are bright and end up coming up with great, degrees, in this case, a master's level degree, cannot work in Europe or in the US because of the visa problem. So we see another struggle. They no longer get a job in the country that they so look forward to, but they also have to go back to their country, fight to get the right job, and continue to pay this debt. So I think all in all, I'm not saying it's like that for every single student, but in general, I think Gen Z are facing the hustle culture from a very early age. And I think as we progress in the conversation, I would like to invite us all to think about how is this beneficial to them. But that will be for, a few minutes later when we get into the maybe part 2, part 3, Lakshan.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you say that, Goldie, because what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing a lot of people as a result of the situation with respect to like student debt and the unemployment aspect of it. I'm seeing a lot of people. I'm seeing a lot of people choose to either not go abroad and study, or the ones who have gone abroad because of the visa constraints are coming back and saying, "Hey, I want us to start doing our own thing." So that entrepreneurship spirit, it seems like we're screwed if you don't figure this out. Not from a place of it's my passion, I want to do. It's like we have to figure some way to go about doing this, and that takes us into the second part quite neatly, which is talking about what are their financial habits and their decision making like. More so, what is the psychology that they have with respect to finance? Now, actually, how does Gen Z deal with money, right? Or at least how do they try to? Gen Z does not handle money the way that previous generations did. And the reason for this is because of something that we've spoken about in a previous episode, which is how they view money differently to every other generation before them. I want to share something I noticed recently, which is when a friend of mine, this Gen Z guy, he got his first significant bonus. Now, instead of saving it, like what parents would typically say, mine would 100%, my mom would for sure. This guy decided, you know what, I'm going to split this 3 ways and set aside some portion of my money for experiences and spending it that way, some portion for my investments, and the rest as their safety net. So when I asked him what made him split it 3 ways this way, he said that I've seen too many people work for 30 years for a retirement they never reached. And there's data which backs this up. According to Groundworks Analytics, while parents and peers still heavily influence the financial habits of Gen Z themselves are creating their own playbook. In India, particularly, many Gen Z are the very first in their families to truly engage with personal finance. They're literally figuring this out as they go. I know this is the case for me while I'm technically not a Gen Z. I'm the first one. Myself and my younger brother are the first people to actually sit and learn about personal finance. It's something we spoke about. Goldie, you mentioned in the psychology of money episode, and we're figuring this out as we go. And which is why we come to clash with the way that mom talks and thinks about money rather. But I want to talk about something that is fairly concerning with the way that Gen Z go about spending money. Now, there is this scheme that is gaining popularity in India, which is the buy now, pay later (BNPL), and other digital lending kind of schemes that are exploding. Because of which Gen Z are in a place where they're like, okay, let me just take this up, buy what I want to buy now, pay it out at a future date. But they don't realize how quickly debt can accumulate.
Mm.
The second thing is, of course, the obsession that they seem to have with crypto and high risk investments, again, which we spoke about in the previous episode, which is that they feel like there is a lot more risk they have to take in terms of the investments to get the same kind of returns that stable, steady, slow investment used to give for like boomers, in that generation. Again, crypto, it's super appealing, but when you don't have the knowledge, you will lose big time. Of course, the third aspect is how tightly linked your financial stress is with your mental health. There's a Forbes report which says that money worries are a major stressor for Gen Z. And then there is this study done by ResearchGate, a study called Financial Behavior of Gen Z Millennials. Gen Z tends to prioritize short term financial goals over long term wealth building, which makes them obviously more vulnerable to economic instability. While some Gen Z are financially very savvy, a lot of them are just winging it. And they're prioritizing experiences over savings thanks to social media and Western spending trends. I've spoken a lot in this portion of the episode, Goldie. How do you feel about the way that Gen Z are going about making their financial decisions right now?
I think the one key sort of d- difference that I'm observing here is cash versus credit. There's a huge emphasis on the way they spend with the 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 operational side of how they're spending. So, how many Gen Z do we know that are actually managing cash in their hands? Very few, I think. Everyone's got a card, a debit card, whether it's a credit card or whether it's a GPay or whatever you use in India. Here we have the same thing going on. We call it a Bizum here, or it's just, Apple Pay. I think it doesn't help when the 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 scenario of spending is governed entirely by credit and not cash. Psychologically, that doesn't make you see what is it that you're spending on or how much you're spending. It's completely, let's call it, there's a veil, yeah, before you receive your statement at the end of the following month. And then if you have schemes like the ones you mentioned, the BNPL, well, that's just calling for debt to rise on a very large level. It reminds me of the time when I was a student at university, and what we had, what they called student overdrafts facilities. So you could get a credit loan, which was interest free actually back then. Sounded so attractive when you hear it now, where you could get up to say £1,000, £2,000, and then you pay it up later within a year after you graduate or 2 years after you graduate. It was so attractive because it was credit, right? It was just getting some money which you thought was yours, but the truth is you have to pay it up later. And I very clearly remember my dad telling me, why do you have to get an overdraft? You don't need to. You're on a budget. We give you the money every month. There's no need for this. Until I said, yeah, but it's good for a rainy day and this and that. And he goes, no, if you take that, it's just going to make rain more come fast in your life. He would say this to me, and I mean, it all makes a lot of sense, right? Why call for a problem when it doesn't knock on your door? You're asking it to come through the door. So that's the first thing I'm observing in terms of how they view spending. Now, in terms of the choices, which is obviously the most important thing here, is I think they're the generation who clearly want to spend on experiences, as you've mentioned. Sustainability is a huge factor in the way they spend. I think they are definitely more cautious in their spending only because they have been exposed to debt from such a young age in a very organic way, whether it's student debt or knowing that nothing is sort of that cheap because the parents have told them this. So I do observe them, very attracted to subscriptions where you get a discount or coupon spending or looking for the best deals. I find that they're the generation who does a lot of research before they make their spending decisions. And I can talk for my own children. Yes, they love to spend, of course, like all young people do, but I do notice that they do take that extra amount of time before deciding where to put their money, whether it's a consumer good or even as much as where should I buy my next travel ticket, because there's so much out there where you can get a discount of some kind. So I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword, as you said. They have a lot of credit to work with, but then they're also quite cautious in their spending. And I think a lot of that has to do with even this whole idea of work-life balance. They want to have a good time in their life because they believe mental health is a big component. So whereas maybe you and I would not have spent so much of our money on well-being, they do. They definitely do. Whether it's a day to the spa or on therapy, it can go in absolute extreme directions. But for them, it's a very normal thing, to spend their money on that.
Yeah. And what you mentioned about the sustainability aspect of it, another thought came to my mind, which is that they care a lot about, their values and aligning with the values of other brands. No, they're
Yeah.
very particular about the whole brand value alignment and all that. And I also
Mm.
feel like they spend on things that they believe in, they align with. For example, um, the carbon footprint, whatever manufacturing is done with minimal amount of carbon footprint, any kind of environmental thing, or any other thing that they stand, child labor, anything that does not have all of these components to it. I feel like they are willing to spend more, wherever organic foods, things of that nature.
Mm.
They are willing to spend a
Yeah.
lot more on things that they stand for and that they believe in. And I feel like that gives us a glimpse on how the future of Gen Z and finance might look like moving forward. And that takes us to the third part of this episode, which is the future of Gen Z finance. What's very fascinating is that everybody talks about Gen Z as if they're doomed to fail due to this financial instability. But what I'm seeing is that they're very quietly rewriting this entire playbook. Gen Z are adapting. Here's how. The first thing I'm noticing is that they've picked up a lot of side hustles. Gold is something you mentioned, and entrepreneurship, which is something that I mentioned, right? A lot of Gen Z are choosing freelancing or business building over traditional jobs. There is this Mintel report which says that financial independence is a top priority for the Indian Gen Z. Second thing is fintech and AI driven finance. Digital banking, micro investing, and AI based saving tools are really helping Gen Z make better money moves. And the third thing is the changing financial priorities. Unlike our generation, which is millennials, who still do focus on buying homes and getting stable jobs, Gen Z seems to care a lot more about the flexibility aspect of it, ethical investing, and financial autonomy. But here's the catch: Gen Z still needs financial education and stronger safety nets. If companies and governments and families don't step up, this cycle of instability is just going to continue. While there are finance content creators and influencers who are trying to bridge that gap to some extent, I feel like not all of them are the right people to do so, because I don't feel like they're all the best equipped people to do so. Now, Goldie, I know you're the kind of person who, you also mentioned this earlier in this episode, where you prefer to look at what are the opportunities that are coming as a consequence of the situation we're in. I'm curious to know what are some of the opportunities that you're seeing arising for Gen Z moving forward.
You know, obviously their financial future can be a challenging one, and I'm not denying that in any way. But nonetheless, I don't want to discredit that I think there are numerous pathways that could lead to more optimum outcomes for them. And here's why. You know, we've spoken about financial literacy. I think from all the previous cohorts, their seniors, they definitely have been exposed far more to what we call financial literacy at a very early age, you know, especially because of the exposed financial struggles that they have faced, also coming from their parents, the millennials who have also, sorry, the Gen X, us, who have seen some crashes as well, the economic crashes in our times. You know, they have cultivated what we call adaptability and resilience in many ways. It's kind of ingrained in them through their formative years. Now, these skills show up later in life, and we know this because of the coaching that we do. So what you face in terms of hardships can be overcome with much more ease when you are faced with more adversity in the future, because it's like your memory reminds you of how you overcame that in the first place. Okay, so for me, I think that's a very optimistic vision for them. I also feel that they definitely are the generation that have a lot more awareness on investments, whether it's even, let's look at the most basic form of investment that they look at, which is trying to go for a product that will serve them for a longer period of time, because this comes from their ideology of sustainability. So they may believe in spending that, you know, €2 or $2 extra on a product, but they have done enough research that tells them this is a product that's going to last me that many years more. Okay. So I think they are one of those quality over quantity type generations. And this too, in the long run, will play, you know, in their favor, in my opinion, in terms of how their money is going to be managed. I think the biggest pointers here are also their entrepreneurial spirit. They don't have a choice but to become entrepreneurs, whether it's at school, whether it's initiatives made at college in their degrees itself. I mean, I can tell you for my own son, who is currently doing a degree in communication and media. But aside from studying his degree, he's also got a part-time job that he, you know, takes very seriously. He's constantly worried about his accommodation because the circumstances that he's in, their leases get finished much sooner. So Gen Z has this ability to adapt very quickly to the situation. And when you speak to him, yes, he has got that stress, but somehow he manages and navigates that stress in a very different manner to, say, myself or even, you know, the older millennials would, because it's kind of like it's part of their DNA. And so that's why I really believe that Gen Z yes, they have a struggle ahead of them, but they're also more prepared for it. And we just need to wait and watch. I want to sort of, you know, add the famous analogy that you always give, Lakshan, which is two generations that have one in between tend to resemble each other a lot. And I do believe that, you know, Gen Xers were the first hustlers in terms of, you know, generational. We were called the skeptics, I think, who were more pragmatic. Now I feel that Gen Z are just a cleaner 2.0 version of us that are coming about and, you know, showing us what they have in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the optimism with which you're speaking about Gen Z, because I feel like a lot of them themselves may not necessarily have that. Of course, when things are going really bad, but overall, similar to what you said about Gen X and Gen Z being similar, that according to that Deloitte report that I quoted earlier in this episode, there's data which says that a large portion of the Gen Z and even millennials, especially in India, are positive about the next 12 months in terms of the economic situation of the country and of their own personal financial situation. So it seems that what you said about these two generations sharing similarities is very much true. And I want to use that as a way to wrap this entire conversation up and bring it to a close by saying that Gen Z in India and across the world are against some real financial struggles. The job market is unstable, the cost of living does keep rising, and the debt is becoming a norm rather than an exception. Yet, similar to what you said, Goldie, Gen Z are still finding ways to hustle, adapt, and push forward. What's clear is that this generation is rewriting the financial rulebook. But will they win the game? What's so certain is that they need our support to do so. Whether that's through better financial education, government policies that actually help, or simply a shift in how we think about financial stability, this conversation needs to continue. And as long as we do that, we will learn how we can actually mind the Gen gap. So if you found this episode insightful, please share this with a Gen Z in your life, or better yet, with an older generation who might fail to understand why things aren't as simple as just save more. And with that, we come to the end of episode 22 of Mind the Gen Gap podcast. I've been your host, Lakshan.
And I've been your co-host, Goldie.
Thank you so much for watching, tuning in, and listening all the way to the very end.
Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros.
See you in the next one.
Hasta pronto.
Bye.